going to
Record, okay.
begin the recording. Do you see a little recording button up in the corner?
Yes. I'll share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to mute on our side, so when you are ready, you can introduce yourself and begin.
Okay. All right, I'm Emma Haberman, and I'm my elementary and special education major. I'm doing my student teaching in Hartington, Newcastle Public Elementary School. I did my first 9 weeks in a fourth through sixth grade resource room, and I'm just finishing up in the first grade room right now. I just want to give a heads up. I'm doing this presentation from my grandparents' farm, and the internet is sometimes kind of sketchy, so just let me know if I lose. So far, it's been working well today, so I'm not worried. My competency statement is that I'm competent at using assessment to gain insight into students' understanding and then guide my instruction. And I highlighted a few important pieces on this. The using assessment, so how do I use assessment to get an insight into students' understand what they know, and then how do I use that to guide my instruction and plan for the next days. So a little overview of how I'm going to do my presentation. I'm going to show you where I started and then began to grow in using assessment, and then how do I use assessment today, and I'll tie it all together and what it all means to me and what assessment means to me, and then my next steps. And my theme that this fits under is assessment practices and professional judgment. And when I started putting my presentation together, I really wasn't sure where I wanted to go and what questions I had. And so these questions stuck out to me, and I kind of answered them as I went on, but then as I worked through this presentation, I answered different questions and came up with different answers, which I'll talk about at the end. But I wanted to ask myself, what makes good assessment? How do I use a good assessment? And how do I understand the relationship, specifically between my instruction and assessment, how they work together? And then how can I use formative assessments to inform my instruction? I'm going to show you our beginning steps. And these are 2 lesson plans, screenshots from math block and then my lit block. And you can see I kind of planned for assessment, but not really, or I didn't plan on how to use it. So really, like, what's the point of it? And here, so you can see in math block, it says students may come to the wrong answer. So I knew that they would have misconceptions and they would have misunderstanding and need help, but I had no plan for what to do. So I knew they might be misunderstanding things, but what am I going to do with it? I had no plan. And then down here in lit block, kind of the same thing. I had a check for understanding, and I had students share the text features they are planning to use in their book. But what does that mean? Like, they can share that, but how am I going to use that information? I had no plan for that next step. What am I going to do with this? And then getting there, this is a lesson plan for my SPED block. And in this, I included this because here I included assessment in the middle of the lesson. It wasn't just a piece I threw in at the end. It's like in the middle of the lesson. So the intent was that it'll guide my instruction, but I really wasn't planning for that again. As you can see here in the lesson plan, I had, when all students are done writing, have them flip their boards over into showdown, reinforce correct answers, correct mistakes, but then just move on. So again, like, I did that assessment piece and I had them show me, do you get it, do you not? But I still didn't use that. I didn't do anything with that information. I just moved on to the next thing. So here I'm going to talk about how I use assessment now, and I'm going to talk about specifically in the classroom in whole group instruction. And I've found that I use a lot of quick checks, and then I use these quick checks to plan for their small groups, or use this quick check to create small groups. And there's been a big push in our district for using small groups in instruction instead of just always teaching the lesson to the whole class, because some kids are going to be up here and they get it. Some kids need way more help. So we've had a big push for using small groups so you can teach to the student's level. So that's kind of what I focused my assessment on. And here I just have a quick assessment I did during our spelling lesson one day. And this week we were learning about long A with the silent E at the end. So they had to spell the word date. And you can see in this picture, I highlight, it might be kind of hard to see, but these students in yellow, they spelled the word correctly, so I can see they understand how to use the silent E at the end. They get it. Whereas these students in red right here, they forgot the E at the end, so their word still says dat, not date. So they aren't applying that skill yet. So I know from here, and you can't see all of them. There were other students who spelled it incorrectly. So in this instance, I stopped right away and we reviewed and we blended this word. This says at. How do I make it say date? And then like, okay, we add the E. And then I give them another word. And then if they still didn't get it after the next word, I'm like, okay, these kids, we need to review again later. And I included in here just a little note from the principal. She was in there reviewing that day. And she said, group responses by using the boards allows you to see who needs more help. Great way to create small groups later, which was my exact thinking. And then we also did finger checks later on. Like we were talking about contractions. So I said, who gets it? Who doesn't get it? So then I knew a lot of them didn't get it. So I knew tomorrow we need to come back to contractions. And then here is another piece from a math lesson we did. And we started doing self-assessments and having the students tell us how they feel about the lesson, and then using that in conjunction with their worksheets. Because a lot of the times we'll have the kids put your sticky note on, I don't get it at all, this makes no sense, or I kind of get it, but I still need some help, or I totally get it and can do it on my own. And a lot of the times, these kids are way tougher on themselves than I would have been. And they say they don't get it all, and then you look at their worksheet and they got them all correct. Or sometimes they think they totally get it, but they don't. So it's just nice to see how they're feeling about the content, and then look at their worksheets and then use that to plan for my next day. And I found as doing my student teaching, a lot of my lesson plans become just sticky notes on what I had planned. Like I had planned a whole new lesson for the next day. But after this assessment, a lot of them were not getting it. And looking at their math papers, they weren't getting it. So I decided we need to review adding decade numbers, so 10 or 20, and we need to review patterns. But then I knew there were kids who got this. So those kids who got it and had already completed their assignment could go on to doing IXL and doing more challenging math. So using that assessment to see who needs that extra help and who's ready to go on. And here's some more. And then I also talked about using assessment in the small groups. And in the small groups, I use that assessment to check their understanding of the whole group lesson. And here, my lesson plans to become handwritten, but what do I need to do today after what happened yesterday? And this lesson plan, just real quick, we're going to read long A words. And if they get it, great, we're going to move on to the story. If they have issues, we're going to right away, planning, we're going to review that story and read additional words in practice. And then up here, I have my just quick little how I did this assessment. This girl read all the words. She just had a reversal, a B for a D, which we need to work on that, but that tells me she could apply the silent E rule, and she knew that that word said, that A said A and not A. Down here, this student read it as a silent A, but he self-corrected it. So he saw his mistake and fixed it. And this student read it as a long A, but again, had a substitution for that first letter, which tells me these students are applying the rule and they can do it, so we can go on and we don't need that extra review today. So that's kind of how I've been using assessment in the small groups to assess their understanding. I just have more pictures in here if I have time later to come back to. And then I also wanted to touch on talking about assessment as a dual major, talking about assessment in the SPED room. And I didn't really feel comfortable using as much evidence in here just for confidentiality reasons from the SPED room and how the programs were all set up. But we did have one intervention we used in the SPED room, a reading intervention, where the purpose was students had to look at this page right here and just read the vowel sounds, like go across and just tell me the sound. So E, J, E, and go across. And we had one student, he came in and he couldn't focus and track, and he was reading up here using E, what. I could not get an understanding of what sounds he knew and what sounds he didn't, because he was all over the place. So I just did a quick accommodation and took these sounds and wrote them on a flashcard so I could show them one at a time. and I was still assessing the same skill, but using flashcards, I could really get an understanding of what he knew and what he didn't. He was looking at one letter, and I knew what he was talking about. And this also, using flashcards, allowed us, because you look at this page right here, and it can be kind of intimidating, seeing all of these letters we have to get through. But using the flashcards, it was one at a time, and we could stand up and move around and stretch and get some energy out while we did our flashcards, and I could still get an understanding of what sounds does he know, what doesn't he know, which ones do we need to review, and which ones do we not. And assessment as a SPED teacher is really important, and when I was in the SPED classroom, we would do weekly reading assessments on the students, just weekly running records to see how their reading fluency is coming along, and we'd graph them, and every week we would show the students their graphs to give them a little ownership of their growth and understanding where they're at. And that was great. I just couldn't show evidence of that for confidentiality reasons. And then, so kind of my synthesis and reflection, it kind of ran together. And as I put this presentation together, each time I went through it, something different came out to me. But one of the big things that jumped out to me using assessment in the classroom is that consistency of being in there every day makes it just part of the day. Whereas like in math block, if I had wanted, I could have included more assessment into my pieces, but I really didn't know coming in on Tuesday. I wasn't there on Monday, so I didn't know what they did on Monday. I didn't know if they understood Monday's lesson, so I couldn't use that to plan for Tuesday. And if they didn't get Tuesday's lesson, I didn't come back until Thursday. So it's hard to use that assessment to plan for the next day. But being in student teaching and being there every single day, I can see what they're doing today and use that for tomorrow and keep going. And then I also came into this thinking, oh, I'm doing assessment. I'm going to create some really big, cool like tests and quizzes, and we're going to do all this fun stuff to do assessment and understand what you're learning. But I just kind of realized that assessment doesn't have to be a test. And we're just always continually assessing students' understanding, whether it's a formal test or informal quick checks like thumbs up, thumbs down, or just conversing with students, talking to them. We're constantly doing that assessment piece, always. And then my next steps, I just talked about how assessment doesn't have to be a big test or formative thing. It can be quick, informal questions. But I do want to, on my next steps, focus on using bigger summative assessments to plan for years ahead and use the assessments this year, not only to plan for tomorrow, to plan for next year. And how can I teach better next year? And so in summary, I showed you some lesson plans where I had no plan for how to use assessment, but then how I was starting to use assessment to create small groups and check understanding and then influence the next day's plan. My big piece that I learned from this is that we're continually assessing students all the time. And with that, have any questions?
Okay, there you go.
Emma, you did a wonderful job explaining assessment, and you have a good understanding of how you use data to guide instruction. In the small group setting, when you worked with your students, whether it was in reading or math, would you use the same strategies, or did you differ your strategies in reteaching?
I would try the same thing again and see if maybe they just need to hear it again and do it again. But if that still didn't work, then I would try another thing. With this math lesson that I had, we were adding decade numbers, and they had like 28 plus 30. So I started, let's draw 28 with 10 sticks and 1 dots, and then add 7 more 10 sticks to add on 70. And I tried that with a student, and he's like, that doesn't make sense. I don't get the pictures. And so after we did it whole group, then I tried it again, small group with him, and it didn't work. So then we just talked, I was like, okay, so let's think about this a different way. And she talked about, you have 70, count 10 more, count 10 more, now count 8 more. So I would try to use the same strategy, just see if they just needed to hear it again. And if that didn't work, then try something new. It's kind of my procedure.
Thank you.
I like that you had an example of anecdotal notes, Emma. And I think sometimes that teachers have great intentions with anecdotal notes. And I'm wondering how you found yourself keeping track. Did you have any major system for anecdotal notes so that you could keep track of things over time? Or in this experience, did you find you were just kind of taking notes one lesson at a time and discarding them?
Yeah. Well, I just kind of started, because for dual majors, we have journals due every week. So I would just kind of, every time the kids were out of the room, I would just kind of take notes over what happened. So then when I came back at the end of the day to write my journal, I would have them or could remember what happened. And then at first, it was just kind of, oh, this happened and this happened. And then I would start to see patterns in it. So like I brought my journal with me into groups, and like this day, the kids were having every kid was reading how wrong. So it's like everybody's having trouble with how. So I just wrote that down, a big star in my journal, and then it came back to it. And some days I'll keep it with me and write notes and look back, and other days I forget about it because things just happen. So it really depends on the day how I use my notes. But I am a big note taker, and I like sticky notes, and I stick them everywhere, and sometimes they get used, sometimes they get forgotten. It's just, each day is different.
Just a little clarification or a little more information. You said that your next step was to try some bigger summative assessments. And could you just speak to the summative assessment versus the need for formative assessment, and what you think why you think the summative assessment is more important
Okay. I guess I don't know if I necessarily think the summative assessment is more important. I just think personally I didn't do a lot of it, so that's kind of what I want to work on next. Is now that I did a lot of formative assessment, informal, I know how that, I kind of know how that works, and I can do that well. But I would want to see how, right now I'm teaching a big social studies unit, and I want to do kind of a summative evaluation at the end to see what they retain. So then if I come back and teach this again, I know, did this work this year or did it not? And how can I kind of use that summative evaluation information to change and tweak my unit for the next time I teach it. So I don't know if it's not really more important or less important. It's just I didn't do as much of it now, so that's what I would focus on next.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, you have any other questions?
Nope.
Thank you. That was wonderful, Emma. All right, give us a couple of minutes, and Jennifer, you can get ready.
Okay, and then just remember to stop recording.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.